I remember last week we gave ourselves some homework. Remember you telling Val and others to prepare for this. The question was about the East. We all know the importance of living in the East, but how are we to recognize that we are centered in it, or we are not living in the East? How is this Eastness concretized in our lives? How do we know whether we're in or out of it? I thought that was some homework for us, and I'll be happy to have some discussion on this.
I like that. Now I remember I forgot myself because the body's funny, but yes, let's pass it around and see who remembers besides me that I didn't. But anyhow, so I'm ready. But yes, thank you, Charles. We should do this every week, so we'll pass it around. So let's see who wants to volunteer and commit themselves.
Well, the comparison part is a good, one of the ways. Looking at comparisons of what one recognizes of the is, and what what's real. Well, again, the contribution part, where you contribute to the awareness of others and yourself at the same time. That way, you create, or you don't create, but you recognize or perceive the reality of it by, you could say, sharing it with others, or like supporting each other, so you see it in that way. Those are two things I see how it is that you recognize it.
May I?
Yes, you may.
Thank you. So there was a question how one can recognize whether it's living it or not. So if one needs to ask the question, then one surely does not live it. So it is not the idea of the whole of life. If one is not sure whether it's living it, so one for sure does not live it.
Yeah, I see it. It's your decision. You just decide to live in it, and then recognize what you can of the is always, and just stand there and be in it. Yeah.
Let me weigh in here. Vesna just said, if you have to ask this question, means you are not living in it. But we understand that the East is all about recognition. Once you recognize it, then it is so for you. If you don't recognize it, then it's not so. So you may be living in it, and you don't recognize it, so it means you are out of it. But we find that people are living in the East on a daily basis, in their daily struggles with life and doing this and that. But the problem is recognition of the East. Do they recognize it? If they don't recognize it, they have no idea about it, And then what we want to know is, are they out of it then because they don't recognize it, or what? So it's something which
Okay,
perplexes
so you
me.
cannot, Charles, sorry, you cannot be out of it. That you don't recognize it, it just means you don't recognize it. But you are part of it. So like the drop is part of the sea. So drop is not individual, although it might consider itself individual one, but it is just part of the sea. If you have a glass of water in front of you, okay, so and that water in the glass represents the whole of life, and you are but a drop in that sea of the whole of life. So look at the glass, look at the water, and show me which drop are you, which is your drop. Okay?
Yeah, I get it. Well, maybe Duane can help us say something more.
Yes, Charles. Again, in and out. See, those are opposites. So those are ideas. Creation is, you could say, is an idea, which it is. So we use the idea mode. We create something, and again, it's the opposites, and that's in creation. No, all life is an isness, and just like Vesna was saying, yes, we're all in it. We're all drops in the sea until we start to recognize something. Okay, at what point can we say, okay, so we're here on the earth, and we have, we have books and pads, we can write things down, etc. But when you're in the whole of life, this drop with the other drops, you might say, or atom with the other atoms, no, you don't have those utensils. And so it's a struggle, and it's through the agitation that actually the wake up occurs. All of a sudden, at some point, you're starting to recognize you're being agitated, you might say. And this is us going through lifetimes too, eventually reaching what we call the human body here from all the other body forms. And this is why there are the body forms, because the body forms create agitation. And there's an instinct there, which is part of the intuition, etc. And that is that once you take on a body form, and you instinctively realize it's just automatically that there are other predators out there. Like if you're the little fish in the sea, you automatically know that the bigger fish are after you, so you swim in as fast as you can. And so through all these body forms, we've picked that up because things become so through the vehicles where they're not the same without the vehicles. And so we come from the isness, you might say, which is all here and now. It's an isness. We go through the body forms where we become agitated, and we start to recognize these agitations, but at a certain point we're ready to see more, and then so we simply start to recognize the position that we've always been in with the isness. Yes, it's a fun cycle. And so in the meantime, yes, people have become, and it's understandable, self-convinced through lifetimes and all these ideas that are going on here in creation. And as you recognize this, you see how very minute creation is. But it's a very important part because we've come through all this agitation to wake us up. You know, it's just like your mom used to wake you up in the morning and say, you know, you're going to be late for school if you don't get up now. So, you know, we've got these different types of agitation, and then the ones we create ourselves and the battles and everything else. Well, you know, it's all a wake up, but it's there's no in and out. It's just an isness, and when we decide to, to do something about ourselves more so than just agreeing with what has been created. So that's one way to put it too. So again, to recognize the isness, that's an individual affair, and who can say whatever. But yes, everyone is in it. Just simply recognize that there's more possibilities than just creation. That's one way to say it, and how you recognize that and see that accordingly. And then also, as the guys have gone through it themselves, and others, they in turn will assist the individual, give them experiences accordingly to where you can better recognize it too. Yes, it's really, really a simplicity, but in the literal sense, it takes a lot to, relate to the world, because the world has become so complex. And so we relate it in a complex way to bring around the literal personal self to where the individual starts to see more if they decide to. So, yes. Okay. Good question, Charles. There you go.
Then I was pondering on some of the qualities that we espouse in the new presentation, like purity, sincerity, honor, and humility. I thought about them and realized that we'll not think about them in the way people in the religions or whatever think about these qualities. And I try to look at purity from this angle. So one will have purity if he has no thoughts of the personal self, but thinks of the general good, and works in accordance with the attributes of the real you, where one shines just like the sun. I consider that to be a kind of purity. And then sincerity, where one undertakes to work for one's freedom and the greater good of life with a real and genuine intention to free oneself from the deceptive matrix and help others do the same, rather than seeking to be noticed and rewarded for the efforts put in. So I think that if one is sincere, he exudes the true qualities of what we call the U-turn, without any attempt to camouflage his actions. And then honor, where one doesn't let down oneself and is true to the noble qualities of being the free being of pure light that he is. He will therefore not degrade, humiliate, and sabotage himself through actions that are not commensurate with his real or true nature. And then humility, I thought about it in this sense, where one recognizes that all life is sacred, and meeting other forms of life is meeting and understanding oneself more. Now, and when one is humble, one stands with all life and doesn't set himself above anyone or anything, so that life around him is nothing but a reflection of himself. So I thought about these qualities in this light, in this respect, rather than the traditional ideas of purity, sincerity, and all that. So what do you say about them, Duane?
I would say that's excellent, and it's a fun way to look at it. And the one I look to the most is gratitude.
Okay.
Very important. And so, yes, no, that's excellent. And I wrote something down here while you were talking, and that is that as we go through this life with how things are, yes, and so everybody has their idea of whatever, like the idea of purity, but the reality is like the sun shining, and it's not just an idea. It's not definitions. I would call these. Now that I look at this, I would call these flexible definitions. In other words, as we make statements, these statements go out, and these are what people look to from the past. They're looking at old statements instead of being flexible. So I like the idea of flexible definition or statements. But it is really your intent. Everything pivots off your intent, and this is what people must really recognize and see for all this to work. It's not just having the plateau of the idea of purity, sincerity, humility, honor, gratitude, and more. It's to have the real and true intent along with that. So you have the politicians that are making pretty speeches all the time and talk about these things, okay? Like it's no big deal, okay? And like this is what they represent. But is there intent with that? Or is there an agenda? Have they replaced their intent with an agenda? You see the difference? It's very important to recognize what your intent is. And so just like two young people meeting each other, and especially the dad of the daughter saying to the young man, what are your intentions? You see? So that is hinted at all the time, but for the most part, and as I went through what I have this lifetime, I recognized at a certain point that most people do not recognize their intent. It's these surface ideas that sound good. See, that appeases them. In other words, it's like they'll read a chapter of the Bible, okay? And, it'll be a sound good phrase, and it'll make them feel good for the day, all right? But within themselves, yeah, maybe they can read the Bible, but maybe they're still fearful and wonder if this is really so, or is there a God, or where am I going, or etc. You see where their intent is? Where is their intent accordingly? And have they experienced their God? Do they know what this is all about, etc.? Where is their intent accordingly? So it's just a surface thing, so it only makes sense because they've agreed to these surface ideas that sound good, that they continue to circulate in cause and effect creation because they only know the surface. They don't see the intent. So the idea, too, is to learn to recognize the intent of the isness also. And then you decide to recognize your own intent. So with all these ideas and attributes, you might say, which are really secondary to the reality life is, the intent is number one. So yes, we can speak of these things. It can sound good, but for the most part, the world is just doing what it's doing. In creation, we simply make sense of things. Okay, so these things add to our real awareness in their own particular way and give hints to the isness. But realistically, hey, when you got to get up and go to work, and you got to drive through the traffic and the mud and the storm and whatever it takes, and deal with your boss at work, and it's not always good, you simply make sense of it. So, yeah, there is a difference between creation and the reality life is. So again, where do these things apply? But each individual decides how they're going to apply to them. But it really comes off your intent. What is your intent? Are you 100% standing real with the is? Or is it just something that you feel safe with and you understand? Well, again, each person decides their real position. They decide that or they don't. So it's more than just reading the words and doing the new you. These are, again, hints about that reality to recognize, and you place yourself, you might say, accordingly. That's UP, universal positioning, which is now here. So, okay, that's one fun way to explain it, Charles. Go ahead.